Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on our webinar about instilling a measurement mindset. I'm very, very pleased to introduce Peter Saylor from NatWest, and he's going to introduce himself in a second. We are very happy to have lots of people joining us today, and we would like to request that you put any questions into the Q&A box so that we can deal with those at the end. We've left plenty of time for that segment at the end of this webinar, and we will dive straight into the content. So first of all, I'm just going to introduce Peter Saylor, who is from NatWest Group. Now, Peter, please could you tell us a bit about yourself and your background, because you are not in a classic communications role, are you? How did you come to be involved with the world of reputation and comms, please?
Yeah, sure. So my background's in research. I've been doing it for the last 15 years, starting in research agencies, and since 2010, I've been at NatWest, where I started in the markets business. So I came in to sort of manage the customer feedback programs, often syndicated studies, which means lots of different banks are buying into the same survey because you're trying to survey such niche audiences. So think of like the FTSE 100 CFOs or Fortune 500 CFOs. And it was there where I sort of first came into contact with this newly formed team in communications called Strategic Comms. And I was helping them put a bit more rigor into their approach to surveying colleagues. They were, at the time, we had about 120,000 colleagues, and they wanted to understand our reputation amongst them, and they were going out to a quarter of the population each quarter. And I sort of said, well, you can do this much more efficiently by doing quota sampling and weighting the data, and you can interview fewer people, get better data. So I sort of helped them with that and found out a bit more about the work they were doing. It sounded really interesting. I mean, after the financial crisis, RBS, as we were known then, this was, you could imagine that it faced quite a unique comms challenge, certainly because of its reputation. So this is something that the bank has been looking at for quite a while. So when the opportunity arose, a role came up, and I moved into that team. And I managed to, with perfect timing, join the team a week after the bank had, this was in 2012, had the really bad IT failure, and there's a baptism of fire into the world of reputation research. After a few years, I'd worked with the team, set up their reputation trackers. When I say tracker, I mean like a regular survey going out to a target population. I then moved into this opportunity arose where I headed up a small team working in proposition development, working across the bank with innovation teams, helping them to sort of develop their propositions, testing prototypes with customers, setting up pilots, which is really great fun, and I did that for about 4 years. We then got a new director of communications, Nigel Prideaux, who's really passionate about reputation and trust, which is, I also share that, and I've got a lot of background in that. So he was really keen to put insight back into the heart of sort of decision making at communications. And so the new team was set up, the reputation research and strategy, and that's what I've been working on for the last year or so.
Great. So not our typical comms person, as we said. So that's fascinating. There was this new strategic team which has got research at the heart of it. So what was the rationale really for setting up the reputation tracker?
Yeah, so our sort of mantra, if you like, is to help make decisions about reputation based on insight and not guesswork, or because it's the way we've always done it. And I think a lot of comms can be guilty of this, of just like, we're experts, we know what we're doing. It's more like, well, let's actually try and use data to sort of inform what we're going to do, and be a lot more targeted about it, but also evidence the work that we're doing and the impact that we're having. So from the outset, the aim was just to make better use of all the different pockets of research and media monitoring that was already going on in the bank, but sort of bring it together into sort of one team and one sort of centre of expertise. But also looking at what have we got at the moment, but also what are the gaps. For example, social media and mainstream media monitoring, we knew this was a bit of a gap in our understanding.
Okay, so how did you go about pursuing this vision?
Yeah, sure. So we reviewed all of the measurement that was going on across the bank. As I said, it was spread across different pockets, and as I said, some of it's not happening at all. Concurrently, we did a lot of user testing, i.e. we spoke to the people who would directly or indirectly be using the research team. So the rest of communications, we spent a lot of time speaking with them, but also outside comms as well. So risk, sustainable banking, strategy, data and analytics, to really sort of understand what's the lay of the land, how do they understand it. I'm a researcher, so naturally I started doing some in-depth interviews. We spoke with our CEO, Alison, and all of her direct reports. We were really looking to understand their understanding of reputation. So what's important to them? Is reputation an important thing to them? What do they think the prize is for having a good reputation? What do they think we should be doing to improve it? What research do they currently consume? But also really important to understand their concerns and trying to uncover any assumptions they have on reputation. I mean, this was an exercise that was so important, and so we got so much insight from it. And I'd recommend if anyone's looking to set up, a team or something equivalent, really worth doing. At the same time, we started looking at our different stakeholder groups, thinking about who are our most important stakeholders and why. What have we got in place to capture their views? I was keen to move us away from thinking about stakeholders as just discrete groups, or indeed along the customer segments structured to sort of serve them. So if you think about, you could be a politician, but you could still be a customer, or you could be a colleague and be a prospective customer. I mean, even all the customers are prospective customers as well, because there are more products and services we could always be serving, providing our customers. So the one thing they've all got in common is they're members of the general public. So for us, the general public became our baseline group, if you like. And the metric for our reputation is trust. So trust amongst the general public, that's kind of where that's kind of our North Star, if you like. But trust amongst the public is a bit like an oil tanker. It's really slow moving. It's hard to change. I mean, unless you hit an iceberg and then it moves very quickly. But that's normally when something bad happens. But I mean, we still need to focus our efforts as a comms function across those subgroups, because those are the audiences in which we communicate. So customers, colleagues, so key opinion formers, and by that I mean journalists, politicians, advocacy groups, NGOs, basically.
Yeah, it's great to hear that the wider organisation took this whole project so seriously as well. So you're a bit more on the methodology, I think, Pete, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so we think of it in terms of ask and listen. And this is just our way of categorizing the different data sources. So the ask side, this is, we needed to make sure we have a consistent read across the different groups, but also across these two different sort of methodologies, if you like. So when I say ask, I'm talking about traditional market research, customer opinion surveys, colleague surveys. This is going out to an audience with a set of questions which you've designed, and you know when it's going to happen. You know who you're speaking to, and it's almost like a controlled environment. You're asking them to give your feedback within the sort of context of a survey. This and from the work I've done before, we already had a lot of this in pockets, but it wasn't harmonized. We didn't have consistent questions or categories in which we were asking people. So that was a sort of a known quantity, if you like. The listening side, which is the media monitoring, social media monitoring, I mean, this is where Anna Kantar and Anna specifically helped us a great deal, and maybe this is something you could tell us about.
Yeah, essentially. So the brief came actually exactly in this, using this language of ask and listen. And the ask piece, as Pete said, was very well developed by this point. So the listen aspect, what we did really was go and look at all of the different publicly available content which was relevant to the project, because we knew that the stakeholder groups which were important to the bank were talking on these platforms. So whether that be in social media, on the floor of the Houses of Parliament, in mainstream media, in review sites or you know, other places that they might be expressing their opinions. And essentially we aligned the people speaking on those platforms or in those media with the stakeholder groups, which were already sort of devised by NatWest. And in order to make sense of what those conversations were about, we used human coding to derive insights. So by hand, human beings reading and coding all of the articles or social posts or conversations and reviews for sentiment and theme, and potentially, you know, what event were they responding to as well. So that gave us the opportunity to not only align the publicly accessible content with the stakeholder groups, but also we were able to use a similar framework. So the same kind of, you know, themes, drivers, events that were being talked about in the survey as well. And I think Pete's going to come on to a little bit more of that methodology in a minute, but you want to talk a bit more about the ask side and how these are interplayed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the two approaches have got their strengths and their weaknesses. So this is where the real power of it is when you sort of bring them together. And I'm not a fan of bringing together the actual data points and blending the scores, for example, but to understand, you know, what are these different data sources telling you. So the listen side is really a really important sort of forgetting that early warning read of issues which might not you might not have thought about. A survey is only as good as the questions you ask. You can't, you know, it's certainly in a quantitative survey or quantitative, so you're restricted by the questions you've asked. With a qualitative discussion, you can go off on different tangents, if you like, and on follow up on leads. You can't really do that with the quantitative survey, and but you need the quantitative survey to give you that sort of that test environment, if you like. You've minimised all of the other potential variables, and you've got a consistent group that you're going out and speaking to each time. So the listen really tells you the things that you haven't spotted, the issues which are growing, which you might not have seen, but it's also your sense checker, just to make sure that if something's happened, is this really as big as it? Any communications team will tell you what goes in an organisation can feel like you know, it's the end of the world, the sky is falling down on your head. But to be able to get that evidence to say, okay, this is bad, but it's not actually, you know, it's not as bad as you think, or, you know, unfortunately, it's good, but it's not as good as you think as well.
Yes, I imagine that one comes up too. So just to come back to that idea of one of the really key metrics for your organisation, you mentioned trust, and you know, trust is quite a loaded term and something that could mean different things to different people. So how did you go about defining it and unpacking it and making sense of it in a way that was helpful to this study?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, I was keen to avoid a composite score of weighting scores from different stakeholder groups to come up with an overall score. I mean, this is from personal experience, because if you do this and the scores move down, I mean, when scores move up, no one questions it. Except, you know, any good researcher should be questioning why has something gone up, and should be as equally panicked if something moves up significantly as it moves down. Because as my old boss used to say, if it's interesting, then it's probably wrong. With sort of, I wanted to sort of make sure that we had one measure that was rock solid in terms of its methodology, really easy to understand and explain. So for us, general public trust, our score of 40 means 40% of the public said they somewhat or strongly trust us. It's simple, it's clear, you can't dodge what it means, it's completely unambiguous. And that was kind of what I wanted to get to. But the problem with that is, in order to make sense of the score, is you need to do an awful lot of work to understand what drives it, how can you influence it. So as you can see on the screen, thinking about trust, and we did a lot of trawling of academic works and lots of different agency works, but you tend to get trust being split out into characterized as character and competence. And there's usually a third, something like intent or reliability or something like that. But for simplicity, we just think of it in terms of character and competence. It works on an individual level as well. I mean, we found a few things out, that you can have a strong reputation for competence, but a weak one for character. We usually give an example of like a big tech company or social media company, customers can overlook their character flaws. If the service they're getting is exceptional, they're still going to use it. They're still going to the numbers will still increase in terms of users, customers, etc. But if you lose that reputation for competence, then that's a real problem. And there are some exceptions where there's a complete monopoly, for example. If, for example, like a train company, some people might not be happy with the service that they provide in terms of a competence level, but they've got no other option to get to work. They have to use them. If you lose a reputation for your competence and you've got a poor reputation for character, I mean, this is when you're really getting into a problem. This is when regulators start losing faith in you. Customers will look elsewhere. Same with colleagues, or even worse, colleagues will start providing a worse service to customers, and just becomes a negative feedback loop. And finally, we found that the nuance between character and competence isn't something that you can really pick up in a quant survey, in a quantitative survey. It's something that when you ask respondents to think about character and competence of an organisation, we've tried wording this quite a few different ways. The two are so highly correlated, it's not worth having, for us, it wasn't worth having separate measures. It just became a waste of survey space, if you like. It's something that you really need to sort of delve into a lot more in, say, a qualitative discussion. It could be a sort of symptom of our category of it being financial services. People aren't as on the surface so readily engaged on it, but I mean, that's certainly our experience. So in order to this leaves us with a single measure of trust, but no way of unpicking what we are trusted for. What does this actually mean? A line going up or down doesn't really help you very much. You need to sort of get to more tangible measures from the respondent. There are loads of reputation models out there, and they tend to focus on similar categories, or we call them dimensions of trust. And I've not shared them here. I mean, not because it's top secret or anything, but more because these are relevant to our organisation and our industry. But I mean, to give you an idea, we're talking about things like customer experience, impact on society, business performance, people and culture. So below these dimensions, we've then got a load of different statements. So things like, is a positive force in my local community, is taking a lead on climate change. We dial the number of these different statements up and down depending on the different audiences in which we're speaking to. So when we survey colleagues, for example, there's a lot more about people and culture and business performance because they're going to be a lot closer to the business in that sense than when we speak to customers, for example. So we've been working on these statements for about a year, refining them, improving them, running key driver analysis, which is a very cool, geeky, researchy sort of thing to do. And we're now at the stage where we can sort of see how important each of these different statements are and these different dimensions are to sort of explain our dependent variable, which is trust. This is important because we can then look at how we're performing, what's the relative importance of each of these statements and each of these dimensions, where are our strengths and weaknesses, and what initiatives, what communications is going to sort of shift the dial up or down, what business activity will do the same. It also just means that we can just be a bit more informed on the activity that we want to do and turn these dimensions into our sort of way of understanding our reputation.
Great. Thank you. So what's been the impact on your team and in the wider business?
So we've been doing this for a year. I'm not going to say we're there yet. We're very much at the start. So our focus has very much been getting the tools in order, getting the research and the data and all of that. That's been very much the focus for this year. But this this campaign model is a sort of it's a bit of a sort of simplified example of how a campaign might have happened in the past. And let's be honest, it's still happening, but it's not where we want to get to. So before, communications would just be sort of an activation sort of function, if you like. The business says we want to do this, okay, we do it. But now we're starting to sort of put insight into the sort of heart of what we're doing. And this is the sort of model, I know it looks a bit more complicated, but it's basically putting insight right back into the sort of heart of what we do. So everything that our bank does, certainly from a comms perspective, but also our wider strategy, has to go through supporting our purpose. And the sort of three pillars of our purpose are enterprise, financial education and climate change. So when I say enterprise, it means businesses, supporting businesses. So the starting point has to be our reputation. Will this activity help it? Is it going to harm it? Where are our relative strengths and weaknesses? What are others doing? How crowded is the space? I won't go into the whole model, but you can see that the idea is that insights, measurement, and evaluation become the core of the activity. It starts with the insights, and then when you do the activity, it loops back to the insights. So it's a complete circle. And that's really where we're trying to get to. That each time we're learning, we're improving on what we're doing, and we've got the lessons ready for next time when we go and do something. And it's a continual improvement. So how do we use these insights? We've got the sort of 3 elements to it. So we've got the looking back. So what happened? What impact did that have? We've got the always on. So the always on monitoring, if you like, the surveys and the listening, the steady read of our reputation. But we've also got the looking ahead. So who should we be talking to, getting a more targeted understanding of our stakeholders? What are the opportunities? What should we be talking about? What are the dimensions and drivers? The white space analysis, horizon scanning. How should we do it? Influencer mapping, risk scenario modeling. This is all the sort of more exciting, well, I find it exciting, things that we're sort of now getting into, which we just didn't have the tools available when we started.
Great. Now it sounds as if a great deal of thought has gone into it. I'm pleased it's making such an impact. So what learnings have you been able to take away from this as an organisation? Yeah,
sure. So you really need to demonstrate the value of insights. But to do this, you first need to understand your audience, and I mean your internal audience. So for us, the communicators, the different senior leaders across the bank, you need to understand their level of sophistication. But this is key, really. You've got to do that internal research, if you like. Our sort of tagline, if you like, is we're very much guide, not tell. We don't want to become the fun police or even seen that way. It's you've got to demonstrate, and for some it's with baby steps, others will get this straight away, but you've got to demonstrate the value that you can bring, helping them to sort of deliver excellent campaigns, give them the data to prove that as well. That's the real carrot in this, is that you've done an amazing bit of work, but how can you prove it? And that's where we come in. So you will get some folk who just say they just don't believe the data. This is not, but you've really got to sort of do your homework, make sure what you're doing is as robust as possible, and you really sort of pick through their concerns and just understand it and sort of try and build that sort of trust. And as I said, you don't want to just become like a measurement function, just saying this is your target. It then becomes detracts from the real exciting insight generation. And finally, what gets measured gets done. I don't know if this is a cliche, but it certainly gets used a lot in our organisation. But for us, it's probably, let's be honest, it's more if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. So as soon as you start regularly reporting on data, people will start to pay attention. And then it's your job to keep it interesting and relevant and useful for them. And those are our sort of 3 findings, really.
That's brilliant. That's great. I'm glad it's had such an impact. So I'm hoping we're going to get some questions through. I can't see any as yet. So please ask our guests some questions, people who've joined the call. Just another one from me, first of all, though, really, is not every organisation has a whole function around reputation. I mean, obviously, everybody's got a comms function one way or another, but the idea of being able to build out a reputation team is a great one. So what's the profile of the people in the team? Are they mainly comms people apart from you, or are there different profiles and different backgrounds in your team?
Yeah, we are a bit unique, and we're an interesting mix, and that's our strength. That's really what we can all pull on different experiences. So I'm the researcher. I'm very much, that's my, as I've explained, that's my background. We've got 2 from the team who come from more of a traditional comms background, so media agency, strategy, and that side of things. And then we've got to data analysts. And this is where we're really starting to sort of focus on, and this is going to be our focus for next year as well. It's just like taking the data into the next level and actually bringing in some data analysts to sort of build up what we call a data mart, to sort of really sort of suck in all of this different data sources and actually just be a lot more intelligent about it. So yeah, our strength is in our difference, and that's I agree, it's a very unique team to sort of have. It's not something, but as I said, with RBS from since 2008, it's had I'd say a fairly unique reputation challenge, which is probably why we're a bit further ahead in this than most organisations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Right, good. A couple of questions have come in. One from Anita Meyer-Epler. What's your experience in trying to automate the analysis of qual comments? Have you had a bash at that, Pete, at all?
I know this is probably one for you as well, but I mean, my personal experiences, and when I started research, AI was on the verge of cracking qual analysis, and it was going to be it was just a year or two away from. It's like fusion power. It's always a year or two away, and it's just like maybe I'm a bit of a dinosaur. Maybe there are some really cool things out there, and I haven't seen it. But my experience is, you can't beat an intelligent human being reading something or interpreting it, and that's the value of the sort of research. It is expensive, and it's kind of what maybe we will get there in maybe a couple of years' time. I'm sure there's stuff out there, but I've yet to sort of really sort of see it. But that doesn't mean to say I'm right on that one.
Yeah, no, well, I would agree with you. They haven't put me out of work yet, the AI machines. So I think I've been working in, with NLP and automation and AI for a very long time now. And I think they definitely bring something to the party in the form of, doing a lot of the heavy lifting, doing some quite valuable horizon scanning to be able to look for signals in large swathes of content, so that then you can sift and filter down to what could be relevant. But you do have to handle AI with care, because it really is something that, first of all, there's an awful lot of biases built into any AI that happens, because essentially you've got to go and ask a system a question, whereas the human brain can kind of incorporate some subtleties and go looking for something and understand it in context. Whereas AI, you've got to sort of ask it a question, and it'll either say yes or no to that question, essentially. So, if you want to do something that's a bit nuanced, then you do need to use the human brain. Another one, any of the comms people on this call will probably back me up on this, that the quality of sentiment analysis using AI is not much better than flipping a coin, quite frankly, because if you've got, for example, if you work for Cancer Research UK, and every article you have mentions the word cancer, quite often that will, you could teach a machine not to automatically say that's a negative item, but you could have had the most successful PR campaign on earth, and it still says it's all negative. So I think the human brain, the ability to be able to see the sentiment, to be able to pick up the nuances of any sort of the kind of the pillars that we've been talking about, those dimensions. Not only was it about that, but when it was about that, was it positive or negative? If you want to build an AI engine to do that, it has to be so specialized that actually it just prices you out, probably. They can get quite effective and quite accurate if they're on a very, very specific, set of criteria. So the human brain is just a lot more elastic, essentially. So I think that's our position. We use AI very heavily because it does a lot of the running around for us. But, to be able, you need a human being to sit on that data stream, curate it, make sense of it, and derive insights from it. And it's a man and machine in perfect harmony, let's hope. So a couple more questions here. one from Ruth. Can you tell us more about the alignment of ask and listen, how you brought together the qual and quant elements of your monitoring? And has the insight prompted any unexpected conversations with leadership? Great question, Ruth. Thank you.
That's a brilliant question. Yeah. So we don't. So as I said, I was keen to sort of avoid blending scores together, because I think you can end up in a position where you spend your time explaining why a score has moved rather than what's actually telling you. So for us, the ask, if you like, the survey data, that becomes our sort of our main measure, and then along the sort of we use the listen to sort of explain what's going along. But it's all about those dimensions. It's all about sort of going down to that next level, because it isn't a composite score, because it's just trust. You then have to look at those dimensions and just seeing, you know, what conversations are happening across these different dimensions. Is it what we would expect? You know, are you seeing, okay, with the negative story, with the FCA case, for example, is this something, where is this negative conversation happening? Is it on, as we'd expect, one of our dimensions, governance, for example? Is this something where, you know, people are talking about our money laundering controls, which is what it was about. In terms of has it led to any interesting conversations? Yeah, I kind of sort of alluded to before, but it's just sort of it's really useful to sort of get that that stop people from having that Chicken Little moment where they think the sky's falling in on their heads, and you can just be a bit more pragmatic and just say, okay, there's a bit in conversations there, but people have stopped talking about it now, even though it might feel like it's the end of the world internally for, you know, a comms function. And that kind of helps with conversations with the with Alison and her leadership to sort of say, okay, obviously it was bad, but we can quantify how bad it was. And this is, we also do sort of ad hoc polling as well, so that we can get both sides of it. So we can go out and we get a weekly read on public recall. We asked 2,000 members of the public which news stories do they recall, and we've got you can see things like, you know, the I'm always talking about the negative news stories, but that's just the habit. There's obviously the positive side of things, but you know, if a negative news story's happened, you can then sort of show again, okay, so people don't recall it 2 weeks later. Conversations on social media have died off, and then, you know, it kind of gives you that that sort of evidence, if you like, to sort of show that the world hasn't ended, which is quite useful.
I dare say it is, yeah. Great, thank you. Now, a couple of questions I'm going to pull together about employee and internal content. So Adiba has asked, you know, do you use the same model to measure content coming from employees? And Anita is all built on this to ask, which perspectives of trust do you measure for employees? You know, do they trust? Do they see, you know, do they look at what other stakeholders are talking about and whether they trust? Do, you know, how they employees respond to your comms? You know, is there, what's in place for employees, and are you using the same models?
Well, really interesting. We've literally just kicked off a whole load of work to look at employees. So it's very much looking at our channels and seeing, because it's such a large it's a large organisation, and it's quite a diverse set of employees as well, because you can go from being you know, in a NatWest branch to, you know, being someone in comms in you know, in Edinburgh, or being you know, a business relationship manager, or a wealth manager. There's very different sort of employee experiences. So, and lots of different channels and lots of different comms team, internal comms teams, which sort of serve them, if you like. So they've all got their different style, their different volumes of comms, or different operating rhythms, if you like. So yeah, we're just kicking off a big bit of work which we'll be doing, which is going to take you know, at least the first chunk of Q1, or you know, even into Q2, to sort of really really understand those different pockets and see what communications do they trust. We find that actually employees are incredibly highly trusting of the organisation. It's 90%. employees said that they trust the organisation. We used to have more of a sort of, before we did the sort of harmonising across the different dimensions. So yes, we do ask the same dimensions, but we dial up and dial down the level of detail that we ask different audience groups. We make sure we've got one question covering each of the dimensions, but in other dimensions we'll go into more depth. So with employees, we definitely talk about people and culture in a lot more detail, because it just wouldn't make sense to us, a customer about that. So we've got that consistent read, the same dimensions across all of the different groups. But we find employee trust is very high. Generally, we did used to ask more sort of trust questions around different products and services, etc., and that was all very high as well. But just for the sake of space, we've had to rationalise the different types of trust questions that we're asking, so that we're getting one read across all of them. So it's exactly the same question across all of the different groups. Did I miss anything out?
That's interesting. Thank you. Yeah, so really interesting one from Joanna, who's saying sometimes she finds that the sector she works in has a poor reputation in the media, but their research, I don't know, consumer research or stakeholder research, I'm not sure which, but, using both qualitative and quantitative research, shows that the public don't share that negative view of the organisation or the sector. Do you experience, looking at your ask and listen, when you start pulling them apart, do you see a disconnect between the views that you're seeing from your general public groups, between what's being said in the media versus what people are talking about behind closed doors in this controlled condition of the surveys that you do?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we find certainly when we start, it gets really interesting when you start looking along sort of themes, if you like, or topics. So something like financial crime, for example, fraud and scams, that sort of those sort of topics, we tend to find is that the media and the general public, the conversations going on social media, the conversations happening in mainstream media are very different, and the focuses are very different on so, in the mainstream media, there's a lot more conversation about technology companies need to be doing a lot more in this, but with mainstream media, with social media, you tend to find that it's kind of more mixed, sort of people talking about their banks, and also, okay, I've got this text from this scam text pretending to be a tech company, for example. So we do find that when we talk about topics, when we talk about different stakeholder groups, we find that there is a big difference in how they trust us. Colleagues trust us through the roof. With our customers is pretty strong. General public it's lower, but then this becomes an engagement thing. It's more about they don't really know. Unless you're a customer, you're not really going to know much about another bank or another company if you don't use them. It's just I don't really have much of a view on them, and that's what we find. And then if you look at journalists, advocacy groups, and politicians, there can be a big difference there. We tend to find that politicians tend to mirror the public very closely, that they tend to have a very similar sort of opinions. Journalists tend to be a bit more positive, and advocacy groups can be, depending on who you speak to, depending on how well you're doing on their sort of the thing that they're championing. So we tend to do very well with advocacy groups, and then journalists as well. They tend to sort of probably have a more positive view than what they actually report in the media.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect of, one of the things we have to watch out for when we look at publicly available content is there can be a bit of performative aspect to what people are talking about in the media. In particular, politicians, we might find that they have to be seen to be rather strident on some issues, potentially, because they know that their constituents want them to be that way. But behind closed doors, actually, when you actually survey them, and it's a bit more of a sort of a private conversation, we find there is quite a disconnect quite often between, what they're said to be saying on social media, what they're saying on social media and what they're talking about actually in a survey situation, which is a bit more reasoned and balanced, possibly. Great. Okay, got a couple more questions to come here. This is all brilliant ones. Thank you. So we've got a different Ruth now from Scottish Enterprise, who says that we have an insights and strategy team, lots of data analysts sitting in various teams and a customer research team. Everybody produces amazing content. The whole organisation can access it, but they're not really currently feeding into the comms team to drive strategy. So Ruth's asking, are there any tips from you, Pete, about where to start and how to integrate the activities and outputs of these teams to better use them to help plan comms and generate content?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we started off. Lots of different things happening, lots of pockets of some really interesting stuff, but it wasn't connected. So for us, it was really about having that sort of framework of how we're going to sort of explain our reputation across these different dimensions, and you can put the different bits of work into these different buckets as well. But also, we've done a lot of work building a sort of a dashboard for starting off with our execs, so that they've got access to it. It's a reputation dashboard showing all of our key stakeholder groups, both the ask and the listen side of things, across all of our dimensions, and just bringing it all together into one place in a really crisp and sort of a quarterly updated, Tableau dashboard, so that they can all see this, and it's all part of it's just a tab on all of the data that the execs see. Our plan for next year is to sort of roll this out to the sort of comms, then anyone else who wants it, really, so that they've got it, rather than just as my colleague likes to say, perfectly shelvable reports, which is often the problem. It's really good to sort of think about that user experience. I'm thinking as user experiences of the research, so that you're not drowning people with lots of data and lots of information, which researchers can be guilty of just because they find it so interesting. You've got to keep coming back to, okay, what's the so what here? How is this going to help? How is this going to improve you? Really sort of trim down the sort of volume that you're sharing with people on a regular basis. They might, they can always come back and ask for more, and we've got oceans of data, but it's just like making sure that you're being really targeted on, okay, what's the thing we're trying to understand, what are the things that are important to us, let's have a regular read on that, and then what's the activity that we're doing, and then sort of asking yourself some questions like, why are we doing this activity? Is this what changes are we looking to affect as a result of it, and how can we measure that? Those are the sort of questions you've got to sort of start off by asking yourself, and then you can sort of put that into place. But definitely less is more. That's the problem, is people don't tend to just read loads and loads of PowerPoint slides. I mean, we still make PowerPoint slides, but we try to keep them to like 10 or so.
Very wise, very wise. Death by PowerPoint. And then last question from Amy here, and it's a great one to end on, I think. So, is there any aspects that you haven't yet looked into that you plan for next year? So, what are your ambitions for the programme going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I mentioned we've got quite an eclectic team, and we're really beefing up our data and analytics side. That's something which we're growing. So we're bringing in more and more data sources so that we can sort of try and enrich our understanding, a lot from as many different, so using bank data as well as social media monitoring, as well as the research data. So we're actually bringing it all together, and we've got some great data and analytic boffins sort of who are actually building our repository for this information, so that we can actually access it, and it's not a case of it's all in different PowerPoint slides or it's in some Excel documents in an email. It's about bringing that data together so it actually lives, and we can make more sense of it. So there's that side of things, really building that up, and then by the middle of the year we want to be able to sort of prove its value by sort of having a set of use case examples of setting ourselves a load of questions of, okay, question one, blah, blah, blah. Let's go and find how can we answer this? What are people in Scotland thinking about our reputation. I know that's a really bad example. Obviously, I haven't got to the part of actually thinking what those questions should be yet. But that's what we're going to do. And the other bit that we want to focus on next year is very much really embedding the sort of the value, the insight into making our strategy. So we've just done a whole load of work to sort of work on what's our comm strategy for next year, and we're just in the process of sort of finalising that. Next year, we want to sort of kick off the process a lot earlier in the year, starting with the insight, looking at you know, what did we do last year, where are our opportunities, and then, you know, having a whole sort of program of enhancing what we're doing. So those are the two things, really.
Brilliant. Yeah, right. That's great. Thank you so much. And I'd like to say thank you very, very much for all of your time, Pete, for bringing your insights, your advice to all of us. And thank you for your time, engagement, attention, all of our audience, and those great questions. So you will be sent a link to this content so you can watch it again at your leisure. And, you know, give us a shout if you've got any other questions. But I think that's going to be everything from us. We're signing out on the 45-minute mark. So that's a good one. So thank you so much for your attention, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.